Welcome back to the Mid-Year YouTube channel. In today's episode, we're diving into this 1968 Corvette to figure out why was it parked for 30 years and was it originally a 427, 435 horse car like the stories say. So be sure to stick around. Last year I did a video on this car where we pulled it out of its 30-year hibernation, and then in the last video you saw I washed it off, started to clean up the inside, and we went over the entire condition of the car. But let's go over the story of this car. So the story I was told whenever I was growing up is this is a 68 427, 435 horse convertible. So we end up looking at the car. It's a 68. The VIN number and the trim tag show us that it was made in October of 1967, so it's a very early car. And then under the hood, we see that there is a 427, 435 horse big block. It's got a 4-speed in it, but let's dive more into that. So I was told the car didn't have the original engine, and if we come in here and look at the pad, I can see it, but I don't know if you can. The engine says CE, and it's got some numbers after that. So CE tells us that this is a replacement Chevrolet engine from over the counter. And then if we look at the casting number on the block, again, I don't know if you can see that, but I can see it clear as day. I'll try to get you in there. The last three numbers are 512. And 512 tells us that this is a 1969 Corvette 427, 435 engine. So that tells us this is not the original engine from the car. It's an over-the-counter engine. So either the original one blew up, it had a warranty issue, and Chevrolet or an individual put this engine in. Now the intake manifold is from a 1968 435 horse car, so that tends to tell us that that could have been the original intake off of this car when the engine had an issue, probably a bottom end issue. So they may have taken some parts from the original engine, put it on this one, put it in the car. Now, is this an original big block car? It's got an original big block hood. It has the transistor ignition, the 6,500 RPM red line on the tack, has a big sway bar in the front, sway bar in the back, 7-leaf rear leaf spring, and a few other odds and ends that tell us it probably was an original big block car. One thing I'm hoping when we pull the body off the frame is that there's a tank sticker on there, and that'll help solidify the whole story. But everything, although it's very dirty, it looks very original. It doesn't look like the wiring has been cut up too much, with the exception of the distributor area over here. But overall, everything is fairly sanitary to tell us that this is probably the story that we have. So by looking at the condition of the body, we see that there was a fender put on at one point, and then on the back side, it's missing its iconic 68 reverse lights that go underneath the bumpers. So the car had a bump in the back. There's a little bit of a fiberglass repair below the taillights and one by the parking light over here. So it looks like the car was bumped in the back and it had an issue in the front, and then they repainted it. That lines up with the story that Greg got whenever he bought the car, is the car was freshly painted, which makes sense. It must have had the accident. They went and fixed the body and paint, and they also freshened up the engine. Whenever we scoped it, we found fresh cross-hatching in the cylinder walls. It wasn't rusty, so it looks like that engine was pretty fresh, even though that was 30 years ago. So I thought this car was purchased in 1981 or 2. I found some documents in the car. It was actually purchased in September 1st, 1984, so it was like the second or third Corvettes at Carlisle. So that's my bad, but I was going off of hearsay stuff. So that's some interesting documentation. Got it for $8,400. He knocked $100 off the price tag. So now let's fast forward a few years. The story I got was Greg was driving and a stone or a wheel weight came up and hit the fender on the underside and cracked the paint right in this area. He was so upset about that. He liked that this car was basically perfect on the outside. The paint was perfect back then, that he put it away in the garage, probably for just the winter, and then he was going to get it out in the spring. And we have a lot of evidence now to show that this wasn't the last time he looked at the car. I thought it was, based on everything we found out, because the inspection sticker, the license plate, and the registration in the envelope shows that the car was never taken out after 1991, but that wasn't the last time Greg worked on the car. So whenever I first looked at the car, I didn't think anything of it, but the latches on the distributor were open. Now I have the cap off to do some work, but these latches were open. So that tells me someone was in there peeking around or trying to work on something. And then whenever we first looked at the car, I opened the middle compartment, but that battery compartment was wide open. There was no battery in it. So something was going on here as well. So I pulled all the spark plugs out of this thing so we could scope the engine, but I labeled them all, and I noticed that this guy was covered in a lot of oil, and a couple other ones had some signs of oil, which could indicate the last time that someone was messing around with this car, they were cranking on it, trying to get it started. And the final piece of information that kind of tied it all together was in this far compartment over here. Got a funnel. Never know when you're gonna need a funnel. And we got some octane boost. A couple cans of that. 3 cans of that. Some Rain-X. That's gotta be a vintage bottle. And we got a rotor. We got some new old stock stuff. Whatever this part number is. What is it? What is it? Oh, it's a horn contact. Might need that. Front pocket find, as Vice Grip would say. Ooh, a screwdriver. We're gonna make sure we use that on this car. Paperwork. Take a look at that. Okay, that's sure. That was probably to clean stuff, but sure, toothbrush. Looks like we may have been having some potential issues with the ignition system, because there's ignition system parts in here. 7 springs, all right. Did my guy go skiing with this rig? What's this? This an old map? Yes, sir. 7 Springs Mountain Resort. I'm gonna take a look at that. That's a good find. There's something else down here. We got some kind of clip. We're kicking stuff up now. It's getting thick. Oh, there's more points. Okay, maybe we're having some issues with points. Crescent wrench. Ooh, the top of our 7 Springs. 1984, 1985. Okay, that's been in there for a minute. Maybe we'll piece that together. Hold up, we got stickerage. Oh yeah. Look at that, we got us a new decal for the valve cover. I found 3 different sets of ignition points. So to me that tells me we're having a spark issue. Now the car had transistor ignition originally, that has been disconnected, and I don't know I've never seen this type of distributor. I don't know exactly what runs it. I don't see anything on top. I don't know if there's anything inside of here, if there's points in there, or if there's a module somewhere under the dash. I don't know. But to me, this looks like it had a spark issue. So now if we take all this evidence and put it together, it appears that either in the spring of '92 or sometime after, Greg came down to try to fire the car up, and he's cranking on it, and it wouldn't start. So he was troubleshooting, trying different sources of ignition, and eventually the battery went dead. He pulled the battery out probably to charge it or to put a new one in, and he may have tried that several times. It's hard to say, but the lock on the door where this car was kept, the owners had the key, and the key wouldn't work. So the lock hadn't been gone into for several years. So it would appear that he messed with it for a while and then eventually threw in the towel on it because he couldn't get it going. So there was some kind of gremlin that he was chasing, and it could have been a combination of things. You can see right now the state of the car, she's a little rough. So there could have been an electrical gremlin he was fighting. There could have been a fuel delivery issue. She's got 3 carburetors, so 3 times the headache. So there could have been a number of things that were going on, and a lot of the car hasn't been restored. So it may have been the situation where he was frustrated, couldn't figure it out, and it may have needed a lot of stuff to overcome that. So at that point, then he threw in the towel officially and said either I'll do a big overhaul on it or we'll get to it maybe someday, which unfortunately that never happened. But that is a little more closure to the story. Unfortunately, we can't ask Greg, what happened. There's a lot of other things we probably want to ask him that we can't, but that's going to be a mystery. But using our Inspector Clouseau intuition here, we can piece together a little bit of a timeline to figure out what was going on here. So a lot of people were upset that the car was put away. How could you put away a car like that? Just forget about it. But you have to remember it was just a car. He had a lot going on in his life. So It may not have been as important as it once was. And he also didn't, I thought he enjoyed it for almost 10 years. He enjoyed it for quite a few less than I thought. So this thing hasn't run in a long time. We're gonna get it back to running. It's just gonna take a lot of work, and we may have some issues to troubleshoot through. We're gonna replace the wiring in the car, go through all the mechanicals, the whole chassis, interior. So hopefully we get rid of whatever issue he was having. But we'll see once we get into it. So from all the information that I have on hand currently, that is the story for the 1968 Corvette. Now, obviously, there's a lot more history between 1968 to 1983 or 4, whenever Greg acquired this car, but I don't have any way of knowing that history. That wasn't included in the car, and I don't have any stories that predate that. So that's what we have to work with. From what I can tell, in my not expert opinion, that this is a real 427, 435 horse car. All the evidence seems to stack up that way. But if you know more than I do, I apologize that I don't know everything about C3s or big blocks or seeing if it's a real car. But personally, I think this car is legitimate, not just because of all the evidence, but why would somebody put in a Chevrolet replacement engine from 1969 in a 68 Corvette? If you're going to fake that this was a real car, a real big block car, why wouldn't you try to put in a date-coded block and just deck it or something like that? Like, I've seen a lot of cars where they have a gray area. Is it originally a big block car or not, because the engine's decked? But this doesn't have a date-coded engine that matches the car, and it's a Chevrolet replacement engine. So to me, the story just seems to make sense the way it all falls together. I don't see why you'd put an engine that clearly didn't come from the factory in this car, and then change the gauges, change the rear end, the radiator, and all the other parts in between to make it look like it was a 435 horse car. I don't know, unless somebody bought a wrecked car and put two of them together, but I don't think that's the case. To me, there's enough stuff in this car to say that this is the way that this car was. It was originally set up this way, but again, if you disagree, let me know in the comments. But at the time this car was built, I don't think there was really a reason to fake it. It seemed like it was pretty reasonable money. They advertised it for what it was, and Greg bought it. But that's going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. We have a lot more coming on the 68 Corvette. Let me know what you thought about this video, what you thought about everything that we talked about in here. Do you think it's a real big block car? Again, I'm not a C3 expert here, so this is all stuff that I found on the internet and stuff the car is telling me. Somebody could have changed a lot of stuff on this car, but the evidence from my personal experience seems to show that this probably was an original 427, 435 horse car, which is pretty rare. And I have a lot of work to do, so I'll catch you guys later.